In the deep silence of the outpost where the stars always watched from above, and the wind carried the whisper of distant planets, a man named Daniel walked through the long silver corridor of the command deck, unaware that today would change his life forever. He was an ordinary human by most standards, quiet by nature, always focused on his work. Someone who fixed things that others thought were broken beyond repair, a man of simple routines and quiet pride. He had never asked for attention or praise, and yet he had found a rare friendship in the most unexpected place. A friendship that went beyond the barriers of worlds and species. The outpost was stationed between several alien trade routes, a place where humans and other beings crossed paths regularly. But Daniel had never seen anyone quite like Rollo. The alien had a presence that could not be ignored. He was tall, noble, and carried himself with quiet strength and wisdom. Rollo's skin shimmered in shades of silver blue, and his eyes held the kind of sadness that only comes from lifetimes of knowledge and experience. Over time, Daniel and Rollo had formed a bond through shared missions and mutual respect. They had once saved each other's lives when a trade dispute turned into a violent confrontation. Since that moment, they had become more than just allies. They had become something close to brothers in a world where trust was rare. But time is cruel even to the strongest. Rollo had been battling an illness that no cure could touch, something ancient and genetic that even the finest alien healers could not stop. He had hidden it well for as long as he could, never once allowing Daniel to see his pain. But when the end drew near, Rollo called for Daniel with a calm voice and clear eyes, and they shared one final conversation that left Daniel shaken but silent. He did not know then what Rollo had truly planned for him. Now Daniel was being summoned again, this time by the high-ranking officials of the outpost. As he entered the chamber, the air felt heavier than usual, not because of temperature or gravity, but because of something deeper. A group of alien dignitaries stood in silence, watching him with unreadable expressions. In the center of the room, a holographic display began to glow, and Rollo's image appeared. Standing tall and still as if he were alive once more, his voice came through the speakers, strong and clear. He spoke of trust, of gratitude, of brotherhood. He spoke of Daniel's loyalty and courage, of his quiet honor, and finally, he spoke of his final wish. In accordance with the sacred customs of his people, Rollo had named Daniel his sole bonded heir, not only of his vast wealth and property, but also of his bonded partner, the one he had shared his life with, the one he trusted more than any other. Her name was Lyra. Daniel stood frozen. He could hear his heart beating louder than the machines around him. He could not understand why Rollo would do something so unexpected. Wealth was one thing. A home, land, even rare artifacts, those could be accepted, although still overwhelming. But a bonded partner, a wife, a woman from another world with her own thoughts and feelings, how could such a gift be passed down like an object? It felt wrong, even if it came from love and trust. It felt impossible to accept that. The room was quiet, until the doors behind him opened again, and a figure stepped through. She moved with grace, her steps silent but sure, her eyes fixed on Daniel with something close to curiosity but not coldness. Her skin was soft gold, her hair long and woven, with silver strands that caught the light like falling stars. She wore a traditional dress that shimmered like the surface of a quiet lake, but it was her expression that struck him most, not sadness, not fear, but calm acceptance, the kind that comes from knowing things far beyond human understanding. She stopped a few steps away from him and spoke softly, her voice smooth and filled with layered tones that hinted at emotion without revealing too much. She introduced herself as Lyra and told Daniel that she was aware of Rollo's decision. In her culture, such transfers were not seen as ownership, but as the continuation of trust. A bonded partner could choose to remain, to honor the final wish of their companion, or to walk away free. The choice, she said, would be his and hers together. There would be no force, no pressure, only the wish that whatever decision was made, it would be made with understanding. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He looked at Lyra, not as a gift or a legacy, but as a person caught in the same wave of uncertainty that he was. He nodded slowly, unsure of what to say, but aware that this was not a moment to run from. He asked her if she would walk with him for a moment, just to talk, and she agreed without hesitation. They left the command hall and walked through the quiet gardens of the outpost, where soft light glowed from small lanterns and the stars reflected. In the glass roof above, Daniel asked her about Rollo, about the kind of bond they had shared, and she spoke with warmth and clarity, telling stories that revealed the depth of their love and respect. She spoke not with sorrow, but with strength, as if keeping his memory alive through words that danced like wind in the trees. As they walked, something began to settle between them, not affection, not romance, not yet, but a recognition of two lives suddenly thrown into the same river, moving forward whether they were ready or not. Daniel asked her if she wanted to go to the estate Rollo had left behind, a place on a distant planet called Noria, filled with beauty and peace. Lyra said yes, not because she felt she had to, but because she wanted to see what Rollo had prepared for them both. That night, Daniel stood alone in his quarters, staring out the window at the stars. He held the legal documents in his hand, the inheritance papers, the proof of ownership, the titles, the assets, and the final sealed words from Rollo. But what stayed with him most was not the value of what he had been given, it was the look in Lyra's eyes, the quiet strength of her voice, and the mystery of what lay ahead. He had not asked for this future, but now that it had come, he could not turn away. Somewhere beyond the stars, a new life waited, and whether he was ready or not, Daniel knew he would have to walk into it with open eyes and a steady heart. The journey to Noria began quietly, but carried within it the weight of unspoken thoughts and uncertain hopes. Daniel sat near the window of the transport vessel that was taking him across systems and stars, to a planet he had never seen before, but had now inherited through the final wish of someone he once called a brother. The stars outside shimmered with silent motion while his thoughts wandered restlessly through memories of Rollo and the strange, new connection with Lyra, who sat quietly across from him, wrapped in a calm stillness that felt both distant and near. At once, Lyra spoke little during the first hours of their travel, not out of rudeness, but out of a kind of respect for the silence that follows sudden change. She had lost her bonded partner and was now entering a future shaped by the will of the one who had gone. Her golden eyes watched the stars with a depth that made Daniel wonder how much she had seen in her life, how many worlds, how many people, how many farewells. She sat upright with grace, her fingers resting gently on the smooth fabric of her robes, her posture poised yet relaxed as though she carried tradition and freedom together in one breath. After some time, Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and careful, as though afraid to disturb the air around them. He asked her if she truly accepted the bond left behind by Rollo, or if she felt it was forced upon her by custom or duty. Lyra turned her gaze toward him, and her eyes softened not with pity, but with something more thoughtful. She told him that Rollo had been her chosen, and that his final decision to pass his bond was not a command but an offering. In her people's traditions, a bonded partner could be passed only if the one receiving the bond had already earned great trust. She explained that when one becomes soul bonded in their culture, it is not only a connection of love, but of shared destiny and legacy. To pass that to another meant passing a part of one's own soul. Daniel listened in silence, feeling the weight of her words settle inside his chest. He asked her gently if she felt like she was being traded like a possession, and she answered without hesitation that she did not. She said she was not an object being handed over, but a soul that had been invited to continue something sacred if she wished. She had the choice to leave to begin again elsewhere, and no one would question it, but she had chosen to stay and walk this new path, not out of obligation, but because of something she felt inside her heart, something she could not yet explain. As the vessel moved closer to Noria, they spoke more easily, each sharing parts of their lives that had remained hidden from others. Daniel spoke about Earth, about how different life had been there, about machines and noise in crowded cities. He talked about his childhood, where he had always felt a little separate from others, always quiet, always watching. He told her how working with his hands gave him peace, how he found beauty in fixing broken things. Not just machines, but sometimes even people, by listening to them when no one else did. Lyra listened closely, her head slightly tilted, her hands folded in her lap, her interest clear in the way she asked gentle questions that opened deeper memories inside him. In return, she shared stories of Noria and of Rollo, their shared garden with trees that glowed softly in the dark, their long walks under twin moons, their quiet evenings filled with music played on instruments Daniel had never heard of. She told him how Rollo used to hum a certain tune every time he cooked, how he once built a floating lantern garden just to make her smile. There was sadness in her voice as she spoke, but also warmth and peace, as though those memories had become soft pillows rather than sharp stones. When they finally arrived on Noria, the planet unfolded before them in waves of green and silver, the sky wide and filled with soft light, the air rich with a floral scent that drifted through every breeze. The estate was vast, with structures made of smooth stone and glass, shaped in elegant curves that reflected the natural world around them. The main house stood among tall blue-leaved trees, with winding paths that led to quiet courtyards and peaceful water gardens where glowing fish moved like whispers in the deep. Daniel stepped out of the vessel and felt the ground under his feet soft and real and far from everything he had known before. Lyra walked beside him, her steps steady, her gaze sweeping over the home that was once hers, now his as well. She showed him the different parts of the estate, the healing rooms, the meditation halls, the open sky balconies where Rollo used to sit in silence when thinking. There was something sacred about each space, and Daniel moved through them slowly, trying to take it all in, not as an outsider, but as someone willing to learn. That night they sat together in the main hall, where soft lights glowed from the ceiling like distant stars. A warm drink made from local herbs rested in their hands, and the silence between them was no longer heavy but easy. Daniel looked at Lyra and asked her if she missed Rollo every day. She nodded with a small smile and said that the bond they had was not broken by death, only changed. She still felt his presence in small ways, in the garden, in the wind, in the stars. But she also felt something new, something stirring quietly inside her that she did not want to ignore. Daniel spoke slowly, then not with bold words, but with honesty. He said he did not want to replace Rollo or claim something that was not rightfully his. He said he wanted to understand what this life meant, what this inheritance truly was. He said he wanted to walk beside her, not ahead, not behind, but beside if she would allow it. Lyra listened carefully, and after a moment, she smiled, not with sorrow, but with a new kind of calm. She told him that she had already decided to stay because something inside her believed there was still more to be written in her story, and perhaps in his as well. She said Rollo had trusted him for a reason, and she was ready to find out why. As the night deepened and the stars moved across the sky above, Noria, Daniel, and Lyra sat together, not as strangers, not yet as partners, but as two souls walking a new path, slowly, carefully, with hope. The days passed slowly on Noria, and the estate began to feel less like a stranger's home and more like a place where Daniel could breathe freely for the first time in years. He spent his mornings walking through the gardens that Rollo had once shaped with care and purpose, and during those quiet hours he often found Lyra sitting beneath the blue-leaved trees, her eyes closed, her face calm, as though she were listening to the memories in the wind. They rarely spoke during these walks, but something silent grew between them, something built not with words, but with shared space and understanding. In the afternoons, Daniel explored the house more deeply, learning the systems Rollo had designed, the tools and machines that were both ancient and advanced. and unlike anything he had ever seen before. Some rooms responded to touch, some to voice, and some to thought itself, and though Daniel was skilled in repairing things, he often found himself simply watching the way these systems breathed like living creatures made of crystal and light. Lyra would sometimes join him, her knowledge of the estate's history, helping him understand what he could not explain on his own. She walked beside him with quiet confidence, answering his questions, gently, never correcting him, only guiding him with kindness. But peace is never left alone for long, and while Daniel was slowly building a life from the pieces Rollo had left behind, there were eyes watching from the shadows. In the distant parts of Noria, in the high councils, and in the halls where power moved unseen, there were whispers about the human who now held what once belonged to a noble warrior. Among those who watched, one name was spoken with anger and jealousy, the name of Dravek, a powerful figure from Rollo's past, who had long desired both the estate and Lyra's bond for himself. Dravek had once been close to Rollo, but their paths had split long ago when their beliefs no longer aligned. Rollo had chosen the path of peace and learning, while Dravik had pursued strength and status, and when Lyra had chosen Rollo as her bonded partner, it had wounded Dravik's pride deeply. Now with Rollo gone and a human standing in the place where he believed he should have stood, Dravik felt the wound open again, and this time it burned with fury. He sent messages to the council claiming that Daniel had no right to inherit the estate or the bond that had belonged to a warrior of Noria. He argued that humans were not bound by the laws of soul bonding, and that allowing Daniel to keep what he had been given was a danger to tradition. Some members of the council agreed, while others remained silent, but a decision was made to summon Daniel for a formal hearing, a chance to prove whether he was worthy of what he had been given. When the message reached the estate, Daniel read it. Twice, not with fear, but with a heavy heart. He had not asked for any of this, and yet now he stood in the middle of a storm that had begun long before he arrived. He looked at Lyra and asked her if she believed he should fight this challenge or walk away from it, and she looked back at him with steady eyes and said that walking away would not bring peace, only regret. Together, they traveled to the capital of Noria, where the great hall stood beneath a sky dome that reflected the stars in perfect silence. The council sat in a circle of stone and light, and in the center stood Daniel and Lyra side by side. Dravik entered with the pride of someone who believed he had already won, his eyes cold, his voice smooth as he spoke of honor and law and tradition. He pointed to Daniel and said that the human had no blood tie, no cultural root, no sacred connection to what he now claimed, and that such a bond weakened the values of their people. Daniel listened carefully, and when it was his turn to speak, he did not raise his voice or defend himself with anger. He spoke of Rollo not as a possession, but as a friend, a brother, someone who had trusted him not because of race or law, but because of who he was inside. He told the council that he had come to Noria not to rule or own, but to learn and respect, and continue something that was given in love, not in power. Lyra then stepped forward, her voice calm and clear, as she confirmed that she had chosen to remain with Daniel not as a duty, but as a choice made with her own will. She reminded the council that their traditions included the right to pass bonds across species if the soul connection was recognized by both, and she said that Daniel had not taken anything but had been entrusted with something sacred. The council listened in silence, and after a long pause, they spoke the decision that the matter would be settled through a formal trial, not of strength alone, but of wisdom, courage, and heart, a trial of the chosen that would test whether Daniel truly deserved the legacy left to him. Daniel accepted the trial, not because he wished to prove himself, but because he knew walking away would dishonor everything Rollo had stood for. He and Lyra returned to the estate, where they began to prepare for what was to come. The trial would not be a battle with weapons, but a journey through the old grounds of Noria, a path filled with tests created by the ancient builders of their world, challenges of mind, spirit, and body. As the sun set over the hills of Noria, Daniel stood alone in the garden where the flowers glowed in the fading light. He closed his eyes and thought of Earth, of his past, of the quiet life he once lived, and of the strange new world he had now stepped into. He thought of Rollo, of his calm voice and deep laughter, of the stories he used to tell, of the wisdom in his words and the strength in his silence. And he thought of Lyra, her golden eyes, her quiet strength, her choice to walk beside him when she could have chosen to leave. He did not know what the trial would bring or whether he would pass, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would not let go of what had been given to him, not for power, not for pride, but for the memory of a friend and the promise of a future still waiting to be written. The morning of the trial arrived with a sky painted in deep blue and soft gold. As the twin sons of Noria rose slowly above the quiet hills surrounding the ancient valley, Daniel stood at the edge of the ceremonial path that led into the heart of the old land, known only to the elders and the chosen ones. He wore a simple robe made of local fabric that shimmered faintly in the sunlight, and his eyes were steady though. Inside his chest, his heart beat like a drum, echoing with every breath. Lyra stood near him, her presence calm and strong, her expression unreadable, but her energy filled with silent encouragement. She had prepared him with all she could, but now the steps ahead were his alone. The trial of the chosen was not a fight in the way Daniel had known back on Earth. There were no swords, no guns, no enemies waiting to strike. The trial was made by the ancestors of Lyra's people, to measure the soul, not the weapon, to see if the one standing before them carried the spirit of balance, courage, truth, and kindness. The trial was a journey through the sacred path, filled with chambers created by nature and ancient technology, woven together by wisdom beyond anything Daniel had ever seen before. As he stepped onto the path, the ground shifted slightly beneath his feet, and a soft hum filled the air, as if the land itself was waking up to judge him. The first chamber opened before him, made of stone and light, and within it stood a long bridge made of shifting panels hanging above a wide chasm. At first glance it seemed easy, just a crossing, but as Daniel took his first step, the bridge began to shift some panels, turning invisible, others changing their shape and color. He realized this was a test of focus and trust, not just in the bridge, but in himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, cleared his mind, and then moved carefully, feeling each panel before placing his weight upon it. His breath was slow, his steps even, and though his heart raced, he kept moving, and soon the other side welcomed him with warm light and a soft breeze. The second chamber was darker, filled with mist and silence, and within it he saw images that made his blood run cold. They were memories of his past, twisted and sharp, moments of fear, failure, guilt, moments he had buried deep inside, but the trial brought them to the surface, like waves crashing through calm water. He saw his mother's disappointment when he left Earth without goodbye, his friend's broken trust after an old argument, his own face in the mirror filled with doubt and regret. For a moment he could not move, trapped by the weight of who he used to be. But then he remembered Rollo's words that strength was not in hiding pain but in facing it. He stepped forward through the memories one by one, whispering to himself that he was no longer that man, that he had changed, and that change was what made him human. As he passed through the final mist, the darkness faded and light returned to the air. The third chamber was open sky, a wide plain with soft grass and singing winds, but in the center stood a creature not made of flesh but of energy, glowing with the light of the stars. It watched Daniel with eyes like fire and spoke not with sound but with presence, asking him not who he was, but who he wished to become. Daniel did not answer right away. Instead, he knelt and placed his hands on the ground, feeling the heartbeat of the planet below. He said he did not wish to become powerful or rich or feared, but only to be remembered as someone who tried to do right, someone who listened, someone who loved. The creature listened and then faded into wind, leaving behind a path lined with flowers, blooming under each step. Meanwhile, beyond the sacred path, Dravik waited near the council chambers, his mind burning with anger. He had expected Daniel to fail, to fall to the first trial, to flee when fear touched his heart, but the reports from the observers brought no such news. Dravik paced like a predator, his hands clenched, his eyes sharp with bitterness. He had not come this far to lose to a human, to be denied again after all these years. He began to plan a darker path, one that would not wait for trials or laws, one that would force the end he believed was right. Back within the final chamber, Daniel stood before a mirror, not one made of glass, but of memory and emotion. In the reflection, he saw himself as he was and as he could be, and within the mirror, he saw Lyra standing beside him, not as a figure passed by law, but as a soul walking freely beside him. He reached toward the image, and the mirror dissolved into golden light. The chamber opened, and a voice filled the air declaring the trial complete. When Daniel stepped out of the sacred valley, the council awaited him, and behind them stood Lyra. Her eyes wide, her hands folded near her chest as if holding a silent prayer. Daniel walked toward her with slow steps, his body tired, but his spirit lighter than it had ever been. The council elders spoke one by one, each confirming that Daniel had passed not only the trial, but the expectations placed upon him by tradition, soul, and time. His inheritance was confirmed, his place beside Lyra, recognized not as a stranger, but as one who had earned the bond through choice and heart. But before peace could fully return, aloud sound echoed across the courtyard, and figures rushed in, armed and angry. Dravik had not waited for the result, and had chosen violence as his answer. His forces surrounded the council and demanded the removal of Daniel by force. Chaos spread as guards clashed and voices shouted, but Lyra stood firm and called out too. The council reminding them of the trial and the sacred ground they stood upon. Daniel stepped forward, not with a weapon, but with a voice filled with calm and strength, and he spoke not to Dravik, but to the people watching from the shadows. He said that tradition meant nothing without truth, and that power built on jealousy would always fall. He said he had come in peace and passed the trial not to take, but to protect, and that if anyone wished to destroy that bond, they would not only face him, but the spirit of the one who had given him this path. His words struck the air like lightning, and slowly the crowd began to turn against Dravik, who now looked more like a bitter man than a noble figure. The guards moved quickly, and Dravik was taken away not by violence, but by the same law he had once tried to twist for his own gain. As silence returned to the valley, Lyra walked toward Daniel and took his hand, and together they stood before the council, not as human and alien, not as heir and gift, but as two who had walked through fire and found each other still standing. The stars above Noria glowed brighter that night, and the wind whispered through the gardens, carrying with it the echo of footsteps that had walked the path of the chosen, not with pride, but with purpose. The wind moved gently through the tall trees of the estate as sunlight filtered across the soft ground, and the birds of Noria sang songs that echoed like ancient poems through the hills and gardens. Daniel stood near the edge of a calm blue stream where the water glided over smooth stones, and the sound of its motion felt like a lullaby spoken by the planet itself. It had been many days since the trial and the events that followed, and though the storm of conflict had passed, there were still ripples in the world around him that slowly settled into peace. Lyra stood not far from him in the orchard where the trees shimmered with silver leaves, and fruits of glowing color hung like jewels from the branches. She reached out to touch a low branch and closed her eyes as though remembering a moment long gone, one that only she and the wind could recall. Her long dress moved with the breeze, and the light touched her face in soft gold, making her look as though she had stepped out of a dream. Daniel watched her from where he stood and felt something shift deep inside him. Not a sudden change, but the quiet knowing that his life had become something new, something real and alive in a way he had never felt before. The estate had begun to awaken again, as if it too had been waiting for this peace to return. The workers who had once served Rollo returned from nearby cities, offering their loyalty and respect, not because of law, but because of what Daniel had shown through his actions. He did not command them with pride or treat them with distance, but walked among them as an equal, listening to their stories, asking about their lives. learning about the culture that had shaped this world long before his arrival. They began to trust him not because he held power, but because he gave it back with care and kindness. Lyra became his closest guide through this world, helping him understand the deeper layers of life on Noria, from the way the seasons moved to the way the stars were red in the sky above. She taught him how to listen not just with ears but with heart, how to walk with respect on sacred ground, and how to speak with meaning when words carried weight. In return, Daniel shared with her pieces of earth stories of mountains and oceans of music played on old strings of cities lit by towers of light. They would sit for hours by the quiet pond near the center of the estate, trading stories and laughter as the days slowly became a rhythm shared between two souls growing toward something unnamed but powerful. One morning, as the sun rose through soft mist, Daniel stood before the central garden with Lyra by his side, and before them gathered the council of Noria, along with many of Rollo's old friends and the people of the nearby settlements. The estate had officially been recognized as a place of cultural connection between species, a new bridge between Earth and Noria, one that Daniel and Lyra would lead together. The council declared Daniel not just the heir of Rollo's legacy, but a true citizen of Noria, one who had earned his place not by blood, but by heart. Lyra spoke during the ceremony, her voice calm and strong as she told the people that the bond between her and Daniel was now one. They had chosen freely, not out of tradition or duty, but because of what they had become to each other. She said love was not always born in one moment, but grown through patience, trust, and shared trials, and that in Daniel she had found someone who saw her not as a symbol or gift, but as a soul equal to his own. The people listened in silence, and when she finished, they placed their hands over their hearts, a sign of deep respect and blessing. After the ceremony, Daniel and Lyra walked through the gardens together, hand in hand, as the sky turned soft with evening light. They paused near a statue of Rollo standing beneath a flowering tree, his expression calm and wise as always. Daniel reached out and placed a hand on the base of the statue, not with sadness, but with deep gratitude. He whispered a few words of thanks, words only Lyra heard, and she smiled quietly beside him, her hand resting over his as though sealing the moment with silent truth. Seasons changed on Noria, and the estate grew into more than a home. It became a place of learning and exchange where humans and beings from across systems came to understand each other, to share knowledge, to build peace from understanding. Daniel and Lyra worked together not as leaders above others, but as caretakers of something sacred, something living and growing like the trees in their garden. They welcomed visitors from Earth and beyond, offering them stories, food, music, and moments of quiet beauty that could not be found on crowded planets or in noisy cities. At night, when the stars filled the sky and the air turned cool, Daniel would sit on the balcony with Lyra beside him, and they would watch the moons rise over the hills. Sometimes they spoke of Rollo, remembering his laugh, his wisdom, his way of seeing the world, and sometimes they sat in silence, sharing the quiet as if it were a language only they understood. Daniel often thought about how strange and unexpected his journey had been, from the dusty corridors of the outpost to the glowing gardens of Noria, and how everything had changed the day Rollo left him that message. But what stayed with him most was not the fortune or the estate or the titles. It was the bond he had built with Lyra, not because of inheritance, but because of truth. He had come into her world as a stranger, but now they walked it as one, not because of fate, but because of choice. And as he looked at her face in the starlight, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything before, not with fear, but with hope. The winds of Noria moved again through the trees, carrying the soft voices of the past and the steady footsteps of the future, and in the heart of the estate, two souls stood quietly side by side, surrounded by the beauty of a world that had once been lost but now found again in the strength of love, trust, and legacy. And